probably before.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Oh, there you go.
Yes.
And then yes.
One thing that seems to be happening for me is that update for my Apple ID keeps coming up and it'll go.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
But whatever, I'll just knock it away every time. It'll be an exit of all the.
Well, I don't sign, I'm reluctant to have people sign into their Apple thing, the computers and play.
Fair enough. Okay, well, it's 1:30. Thank you.
All that's
So far. It's nice to see everyone here today. I hope folks can hear me online. Vicky, I can see you. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we're seeing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Should we be able to hear?
Showing the phone.
It just says turn up volume on the TV.
Can someone online say something
So we can hear you?
with your mic on?
I have my mic on. Is that helpful?
Trying.
Yeah.
No, we cannot hear you. Hold on.
Yeah, they might be that the host has to unmute the
Oh,
participants.
jeez, my
Awesome.
glasses, I can't. The audio is on, so you should be able to.
Unmuted. It says turn up volume.
So the volume on there.
We just need to click that button. And it should hopefully take us to the.
Turn up volume, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe.
I've got my volume.
There we go.
It worked. It worked. We hear you now.
Okay.
Problems on our end.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone for coming today. To all who are joining our DARE event today, physically or online, here at SFU Burnaby, we're gathering on unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Tsleil-Waututh, the Coquitlam, the Squamish, and the Musqueam nations. Normally, I live as an uninvited guest and settler at our Surrey campus, across the Stalo River, on the lands of the Kwantlen, the Kitayt, the Katzie, and the Semiahmoo. I recently visited the Canadian Museum for Human Rights for the first time, and it's left me thinking a lot about rights. I don't know if you've been. If you haven't, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is situated at the Forks in Winnipeg on Treaty 1 territory. Now, this area has historically been a gathering place for Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Dakota, the Denisula peoples, and also the birthplace and homeland of the Red River Métis. To focus on a few of my most resonant experiences and connect to our talk today, I learned that the glowing alabaster stone walkway, it's a translucent stone that's lit with lights. It's designed so you're meant to follow it from the 1st to the 7th floor, and this is meant to be a journey from darkness to light, architecturally and also through the displays. So as you move up through the levels, you arrive supposedly at the top floor, the floor of actioning justice. Visitors are meant to end their experience at the museum with a feeling of hope. And truthfully, I needed that. Canada's treatment of its Indigenous people is a focal point at the museum, thoughtfully addressed as one of Canada's violations of its citizens' rights. Oh, but with a lot of attention to all the other violations of its citizens' rights, including the persecution of queer Canadians, wartime internment of Japanese Canadians, and discriminatory immigration policies, among other atrocities. And the treatment of Indigenous people is also one of the 14 listed global genocides. Thankfully, it's a failed attempt that now gives non-Indigenous Canadians the great responsibility and opportunity to share the truth about our Canadian history and to learn about, lift up, and celebrate these Indigenous cultures and communities. But the visit left me questioning how human beings seem to be so able to dehumanize, to devalue, one of the processes that makes atrocities like this possible. So I also deeply felt the emphasis on human rights and the glaring sense of human as a pinnacle of value. But what of our more than human kin? The human and the more than human are so intimately connected. My non-Indigenous humans, fellow humans, are skilled at devaluing other beings, especially our more than human kin. Our relationship with the more than human world has typically been extractive, destructive, neglectful, disrespectful, and genocidal. And as a result, we are left alienated. What I long for, to use the words of Rob Hopkins, who says we need an imaginative investment in the future. We need to long for a future that we want. What I long for is to visit a museum for the rights of the more than human world. And there are more and more examples of that. And I hope that one day we can have an entire building dedicated to the rights of the more than human. I yearn to move from darkness to light, to feel a strong sense of hope for the future in relation to our more than human kin. I recommend the book that I've listed here on the screen. I recommend Ellen Kelsey's book on how to be hopeful, if you need that right now, as I do. I share these thoughts today with you, introducing our talk, because the special issue of the Australian Journal of Environmental Education entitled Beyond the Metacrisis, Educating for the Future, World to Come, it gives me hope. The authors are calling out the opportunities we commit to more than human world and are envisioning and working to move toward a different future. And this does give me hope. Specifically from the editorial abstract, the papers in the special edition draw on critiques of colonial modernity, neoliberal growth imperatives, and Enlightenment dualisms that separate culture from nature. They conceptualize the metacrisis as an entanglement of multiple polycrises whose planetary scale distinguishes the present moment from historic civilization crises. Collectively, the papers engage with the problematic of modernity and neoliberalism, the marketization of everything, and the alienation that results. Instead of alienation, the papers foreground indigenous, place-based, relational, and post-growth approaches to environmental education, offering alternative, pedagogic curricula, and institutional imaginaries grounded in care, reciprocity, and ecological limits. Together, they position environmental education as a site for ethical reworlding, supporting cultural regeneration, social justice, and renewed human-earth relationships. So it's great that we have so many of the authors here today. We have Dr. Cary Campbell, Dr. Cristiano Barbosa de Moura, Dr. Mark Fettes. We also have Thomas Hoeller, Marion Benush, and Blenkinsop is unable to join us, unfortunately. And so we're going to invite everybody to briefly introduce themselves and sort of give us conversation in question. And in order to make this happen, I'm trying something. You got to try things. It may not work. We'll see. I have a which means that we know what and that means chat. You don't have to wait and then potentially lose it. You can either scan the QR code or you go to the mentimeter.com and you enter your code, and then we'll be able to up a question. So I'm going to turn it over now to maybe I'll just start in the order we're at. Maybe you want to start, Mark?
Oh, right. Very much looking forward to the conversation.
The audio is actually is kind of choppy online. Let me bring down another mic.
Okay. Okay. Is it good enough that I can continue to talk?
We can't hear or understand what is being said.
Okay. We'll wait then.
Okay, pause.
Yeah.
You're breaking up.
We're the mic closer to you guys?
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, having this.
And we couldn't hear.
We can't do much here. You're right.
No.
That's indeed just a little.
No, and you'll lose the picture if you come too close.
Yeah. And we got a foot at least.
Yeah, so let's just pass the mic around and see if that helps.
Yeah.
So online.
I think it's the connection because you're breaking up. It's not the volume, it's the connection.
Well, was touching the house at the same time. So the folks in the room who are also in the meeting tonight, they don't have a whole bunch of other things running at the same time as projects, because that can really Used to work here, used to be on. It worked, but this doesn't work.
I only have the mental and
That's not.
Second. You should speak to the guys. It's all. So is this any better on the audio? Is it chopping?
No, it's not chopping now. It was
Okay.
not volume, Tim. It was really,
Yeah,
yeah, it was the breaking up. We couldn't even
Oh.
hear a sentence or a word.
okay, I was getting that too, so let me add another mic onto the line. Thank you, Vicky, for. Okay. Sorry about this one. Yeah, we should do it.
Thanks, Dennis.
So,
Most people are online, so I think
Yeah.
it's important.
okay, how about that, Vicky? Is it clear?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, all right. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, as far as. Okay. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Okay, yes. And then the microphone, all right, and we'll turn up the, well, it's actually controlled by the, device, it's the computer itself. Just a second, my apologies. Okay, that's okay. Let's turn the microphone up a fair bit. Okay, hopefully that is improved.
Okay, let's give it a try.
So thumbs up online if we can move forward with Mark's introduction.
Are we good?
I think so, yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great.
All right. So I'll try and make this brief where, time is slipping away. So I work here in the faculty. The paper that I wrote for this journal issue, I co-wrote with Sean Blenkinsop, who isn't able to be with us today. Its genesis has its origins a few years ago when Sean and I were invited to contribute to a special issue of a different journal on sustainability. I said, let's try and take some ideas that I've been reading about by Indigenous scholars in Canada. I brought some samples of books here. Leanne Simpson, who many of you will be familiar with, who is Anishinaabe from the northern shores of Lake Ontario. A little talk she gave called A Short History of the Blockade. And then a much larger and more complex book, As We Have Always Done, from a few years before that. I was familiar with Leanne Simpson's work, but I also recently delved into Richard Atlio's work. Atlio is Nushalnuth from the west coast of Vancouver Island, close to where I live. And I read his two books, Tsawalk, which means one or unity, oneness, in the Nushalnuth language, and Principles of Tsawalk, where he takes those concepts and applies them to the global ecological crisis, which is relevant to what we're talking about today. And so we wrote a paper that took these ideas and thought through education in the light of our own work on ways of teaching that can be done in collaboration with the land, roughly speaking, land as first teacher, as co-teacher, as the holder of knowledge that is, as you were in the phrase you were using, Gillian, more than human knowledge. So rather than seeing humans as the source of knowledge and the masters of knowledge in this world, to see us as humble co-participants in that world and co-learners whose job it is really right from birth, as is taught in many indigenous traditions across North America and elsewhere in the world, whose job it is from birth to learn from the beings around us and to learn how to be a good co-inhabitant, co-neighbor, and a co-caretaker of the world with all these other beings. Reading through Simpson and Atheo, they distill some key principles in this. We pulled out 3 of them, which seem to be really central: self-determination, consent, and sacred respect. And we built the paper around those 3 concepts and explained how, where they emerge from in indigenous worldviews, and then how we might use the teachings of those worldviews to think about education in a different way. I think that's probably as much as I have time for right now, so I will pass the mic on, but hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit into some of the details later on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Gillian, for the great introduction. Well, I am Cristiano Barbosa de Moura. I come from Brazil, actually, and I landed here in Vancouver around 3 years ago, more or less. And I'm a science educator by formation, chemistry educator, but I'm quite involved right now with the environmental education conversation. And I think that this paper actually, that's called Navigating Complexity in the Anthropocene, Environmental Education for Teachers in Times of Metacrisis. I'm very happy with this paper because it kind of emerged naturally from Cary's and conversations between me and Cary when I was in this time of transition, and trying to learn a little bit more about this land. And also following up on Cary's paper on what do we talk about when we talk about climate change, that was addressing precisely this idea of having lots of information, this info dump kind of stuff, and what we do now, right? And so I was assigned to teach a course on quantitative perspectives in environmental education, which sounded quite odd to me at first, as we are trying to, develop like a more ecological perspective. And we started to have conversations about that, and then a call for papers for this special issue came out, and then we decided to write something together. We started the paper basically with a story from Yanomami people, indigenous people from Amazonian region in Brazil, talking about the falling sky. And so this idea that, we are not relating well with the more than human world, and that should be doing something different around that. Basically, rebalancing this relationship with the earth. Departing from their point of view, we started to wonder, and I'll just start talking, Cary, and then you can jump in whenever you want. We started to think about, what to do with those narratives that were circulating in the environmental education field, particularly around the Anthropocene and the Metacrisis, which was the theme of the special issue, but also, coming from the polycrisis perspective. And actually, we came up with this idea of maybe a good way of dealing with all the new information and new advances that we have in the fields of political ecology and post-growth studies would be, to come up with what we call simplex stories or simplex points of entry into those narratives. We have a lot to talk about. What should we focus on, or what could be good points of entry if you want to talk about all this complexity in more or less simple ways. And so not simplifying those very important points and very complex perspectives, but simply, putting simple ways so that we can kind of advance with the conversation, especially in teacher education. So we come up with 5 touchstones that actually from our generative conversation, they seem to be, kind of good entry points in this regard. The first one,
At least we think so.
yes, at least we think so, and the reviewers as well. So, but I'll read from here because I cannot understand it in my own writing. But the first one is challenging nature-culture divides and acknowledging alternative ontologies, which basically address this persistent, idea of separating the nature and cultural realms, and not acknowledging alternative explanations or ways of seeing the world or, signifying the world and alternative ontologies. So we talk about that. And each of those touchstones, they are linked with pedagogical implications. So certain practices that would serve as a way to engage in those touchstones. And so the second one, you want to go to second one, Cary, maybe?
Oh, yeah. I have the flower in front of me. So
Okay, very good.
Yeah. Metropolis periphery power dynamic. I mean, I don't know if this is in proper order, but it's at least following the flower.
Right.
And which, yeah, just, you can speak to, but I think that was a nice way that we came to think differently about global South, global North relations, think about colonial dynamics as it comes, as it affects economic trade and everything. A framing that comes from scholars like Pettinaik, I think that's the Pettinaiks couple were a big part of that framing of Metropolis periphery. A lot of it comes down to, I guess, focusing on ecological overshoot.
Yes,
That one core third, possibly not necessarily in the order we described them, but that idea that how much land do we need to appropriate in order to keep the kind of society or the kind of city or the kind of community that we live in running. It's a very simple kind of way of thinking about this, and a certain method for literally quantifying this that has pedagogical implications as we explore. And I think what's powerful about this is that it is a concept that can be, a grade 5 student could conceivably grasp large aspects of what it means. Like I need this much land to keep this, to have the food on my plate here, and all that, all these aspects. And I don't want to take it away from you, Cristiano, but we also talked about aesthetics and embodiment, and maybe you can speak about that one.
Yeah, I mean, but just connecting to those 2 points that we just explored, neo researching political ecology has quantified a lot about, when we talk about land appropriation, or those unequal trades between the global North and South, how much is it unfair, actually, and what exactly how can we really put in numbers sometimes, but also, what politicas of reparation could be in place, to revert those historical exchanges. And yes, we have the fifth touchstone that would be around aesthetics and political of sensible embodied experiences, particularly our experiences of climate-related disasters. I think that at the point that we are right now, we all have experienced something, painful in relation to those environmental disasters, and how can we kind of use those experiences to think differently about our relationship, more sensible relationship with the land. And
also, I guess the broad final fifth touchstone being post-growth imaginaries. Which is an important thing I think Gillian was sort of speaking to near the beginning about this imaginative investment in the future, thinking yeah, just opening up these spaces for yeah, honestly, different different forms of different imaginaries, as they sometimes say.
That's just
Yeah.
just wrapping up then, it's because we don't have much time, but we want to hear from you actually. We wanted actually to connect those two perspectives that are, more sensible, embodied experiences, but also at the same time acknowledging and, building upon those new researchers that are doing an incredible job,
Yeah.
incredible work in quantifying, all those perspectives, and stemming also from my experience in my own course on quantitative perspectives in environmental education. But yeah, I think that's pretty much that, right?
Yeah, thanks, Cristiano. Honestly, yeah, it was lovely. Thank you for, I think you did a great job explaining the genesis of this paper. And yeah, it's nice to have these conversations with you.
Yeah.
And look what we got artifacts from it. So I'll just use this really quickly as a way to set up our article and specifically my two colleagues. Because yeah, no, it's just so nice to, I mean, a great thing about this special issue is, yeah, collaborating with friends like Cristiano. And I think this is the first time Marian Benkayush and I and Thomas Hoeller, we've been collaborating for a long time as part of our group, new curriculum group. But this is the first time we've ever sort of assembled each other for a writing project like this. And we're really just trying to, as best as we can, create kind of you might say, a new, like all of these offerings in this special issue, we're trying to come up with new stories. But specifically, I think we're interested in stories that we consider rounded stories that can, as Bruno Latour says, get us down to earth to connect to a particular bioregion, a particular piece of land or place, and as such, we've had to really combine expertise. So I think it's been really important to have both Thomas and Marian on this project. Marian Benkayush is, I'll let both of them speak, but Marian offered the framing on disaster specifically, and as Cristiano was just speaking to, disaster response pedagogy was like a crucial opening for us to consider everything that we are trying to consider in our article. And then additionally, Thomas offered some very crucial points about land economics and how we organize ourselves around and in relation to land. And really, we're trying to synthesize things that are difficult to synthesize to create maybe a new curricular kind of framework that is often not present in our account. So with that, I'll just let both Marian and Thomas offer, whatever you bring what you want to the conversation. But yeah, please go ahead. You can go first. You were named first.
No, I don't have anything to say.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah. Yeah, my portion of the paper was about economics, and we were trying to bridge the ecological footprint analysis of land use and our own existence to other ideas of economics and how we socially coordinate around land, which is largely to do with systems of private property. And only in the last century or so in the Western paradigm, we've been treating land as capital, which wasn't even the case in the time of Adam Smith, the
classical economics, one of the
leaders of classical political economy. So a lot of classical political economy was distinguishing land from capital and work or labor, but in our century that has been erased. That distinction was eliminated, and we treat land as capital. And my research is interested in asking what kind of problems that introduces, and trying to ask some questions about why it's so difficult to actually, in a day-to-day basis, or perhaps in your career choice, decide to live more ecologically. How can we live lower energy lifestyles?
Yeah.
How can we make these choices? I think there's economic forces at play, processes at play that we perpetuate.
And things that are, I guess, just to add on, not really acknowledged, or just hard to acknowledge in our current, like, or just not on the table. These lower energy ways of living are just simply not offered or afforded to us, right? But yeah, structures that
Agroecology and permaculture, for example.
Yeah.
They're very difficult. They're not necessarily economically viable.
Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. And yeah, and honestly, yeah, Mary, please get in there. I think what you offered was so, of course, yeah, but they're not here. They're not.
Oh, Yves St. Pierre is online. Well, she can introduce herself after.
Yeah, why don't you?
Do you wanna add anything?
Yeah, no, please, Mary.
No, I actually don't have anything to add.
Well, I just want to say, like, I think you offer a really important thing for us is that, like that disasters and the sites and schools specifically, I think this is a nice connection that Mark connects to maybe Mark's and Sean article too, that are these really, just important sites for reconsidering the status quo. In relation to, like, say, what Thomas is talking about, an economic status quo. Yeah, and Mary just has this lovely experience as a disaster consultant, as a management consultant, going to disaster sites, dealing with fires, water scarcity, and I just think that's been such a big thing for us to consider. And do you want to just speak briefly to any of that at all, please? Since you're on the path.
But no, I think it's like I can't make the connection until other people have spoken. I don't like work too well off a blank page, unfortunately. I guess the only thing I will add is that in the paper that we wrote, contributed like a very minor case study that I think really positioned the article towards what it is Thomas and Cary are trying to argue. And essentially it's at the beginning of the article where I talk about after the Fukushima earthquake in Japan, there were approximately 70 school children that died. And a lot of parents were angry because the children didn't have to die. And essentially what happened is when the tsunami came, the children instinctively wanted to run up towards the mountain. And they were inland. And they were the only children, other than I think one other child elsewhere in Japan, like these 70 children were the only ones who died. And they died because their teachers told them to stay in place. And I just think it's an interesting case study around, Cary and I have talked about these things like in other contexts, but a lot of the time when you are in an educational environment, especially as a child, you have these ideas, like you see the world and you don't have a lot of agency. And but that doesn't mean that you don't see the world the way that it is, but you're almost taught to doubt yourself. And I think that's a really like common aspect of the education system where you learn to ignore your instincts. And I just think it was an interesting case study, this disaster, where we talk about it in the paper, and you can find in the bibliography just kind of, because it was a big deal in Japan, like there was a whole inquiry around like the decision-making process of like the adults in charge, and and the testimony of some of the children who did survive. And I think they just expose a lot of the tensions around education.
Thank you. I appreciate you contributing that. Great. We'll see what questions emerge. I'd like to invite Louise online to speak as well. I believe you authored a piece with Sean. I'm going to stop sharing, but invite folks to please add questions. Louise.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'm a professor of design at Emily Carr University, so I'm an odd person out in this room. I've been trying to integrate ecological priorities into my teaching for years, with the understanding or the assumption that a product has an environmental impact from beginning to end. So the first things that I tried were quantitative tools to measure life cycle assessment, the environmental impact of a product from its inception to its disposal. And, after a period of years, I saw that wasn't really working as well as I had hoped. It still is a practice and it still is important. I started to look to the notion of systems change, social innovation, and I connected with an international network that strives to research social innovation and sustainability. And in that network, I began to advocate that more than human beings be included as agents of in the conversation, that their voices be acknowledged in terms of trying to develop sustainability. I did my PhD at SFU with Hisun Bai. Love Hisun. And and so, you know, I do bring a lot of my Zen influence and my spirituality to my work. And I've been teaching for quite a few years now to try and, I've been asking students to design in relationship with nature through the connection with one specific being, and they can choose that being that they work with. And they're not allowed to extract, they're not allowed to commodify. And so this throws the whole paradigm or a set of expectations for designers into real flux, because that's what we're made to do. You know, we're trying to commodify, create, make all the time. This particular semester that is written about in the article was co-taught with Sean, and Sean brought the 6 let's see what he calls them, design prompts. I call them worldview lenses that he had identified with Mark in one of their research papers. And we worked with those lenses with the students in order to try and help the students kind of deal with the upheaval that this course tends to offer. And it ended up being, in the analysis, something that helped me as much as it helped the students. The fact that I could talk to students about, let me see, I'll just bring up that page. Mystery, for example, that it was a principle that we wanted to talk about. Mystery and unknowability. All our relations, that is definitely something that already is in deep conversation at Emily Carr. Recreative dissonance, the fact that something can kind of fall apart or fracture, and then that's an opportunity for positive change. Ancient futures, the idea, the understanding that something might have happened in the past that was even wiser than what we're doing today. Abundant time, which was a really tricky one in the context of a really high-packed curriculum. And embeddedness and integration, the sense that everything is connected. So that's the article that we wrote, and that's me.
Well, thanks for joining us today online. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for all your work. It's really inspiring for me.
Thank you. I love the different perspectives that we're bringing around the same topic, and we have some questions in the Menti we could start with, and then if you have one and you just want to Zoom chat, it's a big audience, so I can navigate that. After all, I wasn't sure how many people would be here, or maybe you just have a question in the room, not just attendees, but also authors. So one of the questions we have, we could start with this one. So one, we can decide which one you'd like to start with. One is pedagogically, how do you envision learners engaging with these complexity stories? What, if anything, would be different from typical Western pedagogical practices, even if the stories themselves are sort of novel or a different, I don't want to say tool, but
Right.
thoughts?
Yeah, actually, we do have some examples in the paper, you know, that can go over actually, you know, and they are meant to be like entry points, you know, like, for example, in one of, let me pick one good example, because you were talking about ecological footprint analysis. We kind of, for example, use as an entry point to this simplex touchstone on acknowledging the great acceleration and the ecological overshoot. And so I believe, you know, that, and we argue for that in the paper, you know, that this can be really a good start point to raise awareness, with the students about their surroundings, and what exactly, the things that we use in the daily life, they come from. And this everything that would be done with that would be to foster a new relationship with our surroundings. Yes, it is a bit Western centric, but we take this not as a master narrative, of what we would do necessarily, but just suggestions, one of the things that I really value in this paper is that as much as it draws from political ecology and a very Western centric, as the question was saying, kind of narrative, it kind of touches upon something that I believe that we forget if we don't think of of the systems level. We forget about the politics of reparation, especially towards the global south. And so sometimes we just forget that we are in very wealthy environments, and so I'm in this room, I can see like 3 TVs, and lots of amazing stuff for us to work with our students here, and we don't even stop to think about, other contexts. So much of our paper actually is addressing this kind of thing, like, how could a teacher, working with those touchstones, use them as entry points to some of those conversations, actually.
Yeah, thank you, Cristiano. And I think it's a nice question. And one thing I take away from what you're saying and what we try to do in the paper is really just that all of these touchstones and the implications that we spin from them are just that. They're just these openings, they're openings that are, again, not master narratives. I think Cristiano captured it perfectly, but they are sort of integral openings because they are, in my opinion, at least, they're not inherently idealized or coming from some sort of abstract conceptual place. They actually have grounding, so we can move from, say, working, to think about our footprint in relation to where we live, the ecological footprint implications, to talk about centers and peripheries, the metropolis and the periphery. And then we can think really, can build on this and think about those global north-south relations, but also say we live in a place that's like the capital, the cultural capital of our region. And southern BC has all the wealth, and we are definitely a metropolis to many people, like where you were just in Gillian up in Smithers. We're some huge metropolis, and they definitely have a peripheral relationship in terms of how power is distributed and how literally resources are distributed too, and energy. So I think like all of these touchstones create some grounded openings for teachers to work with. Again, not master narratives, but similar to what Marianne and Thomas and I have tried to do. They're about trying to think about getting us down to earth in rounded ways, as best as we can.
Literally and figuratively, perhaps.
Yeah.
Mark, could you comment around like pedagogical different practices?
Yeah, well, I alluded in my brief introduction to the centrality of coming to understand knowledge as something that is not simply human derived. And so the great pedagogical problem, I think, here is that when we're thinking abstractly and to think on a large scale, one has to think abstractly. There's no way to speak of, even think something like the earth or even the land are abstract concepts, essentially, right? That we don't experience the land as a whole, we experience it in very tangible, particular ways. And a fortiori, that's true of the way we relate to the earth as well. So, challenge is to make room in our ways of learning and teaching for children to become accustomed to learning directly from the world itself, directly from the beings that surround us. And that is as true in Smithers as it is in suburban Vancouver. In fact, you might have some advantages in Smithers compared to, you know, school in East Van.
Nice.
Yes.
I like Smithers.
I like Smithers too. So I think what we want to think about is a curriculum that, while we're humans, obviously, and humans are a source of these a source of the ecological crisis that we now find ourselves in. So humans and their problems, humans and our problems, need careful thought and a lot of learning around that. But it's vital that the way that we do that learning not in itself reproduce and even reinforce the same ways of thinking that got us into the mess in the first place, right? That is, for me, the real pedagogical challenge. And that's what Sean and I are trying to tackle in this paper when we talk about telling a different story, is essentially coming to understand ontologically, epistemologically, axiologically, developmentally, humans in a different way. Humans very much on par with all other living beings. Yes, and in fact, I love that widespread Indigenous teaching that we are the youngest relation, the newcomers, that we land in this world as these, you know, newborn babies who have everything to learn, because we don't come equipped with a package of ready-made responses to the world. We have to acquire that from the people around us and the ways in which they relate to the world around them. And so that means that our education plays a supremely important role in a way that is distinctive to our particular way of inhabiting the world. And so it needs a lot of care.
So just to follow up, and then we can take a new question. I don't see any questions in the chat. So thinking about the care and attention you're all giving in your work for understanding, acknowledging, thinking deeply about Indigenous ways of knowing and being and pedagogies, are you at all worried be taken up without that same depth of care and concern? Because Dr. Cashel Henneque's piece on grafting Indigenous ways of knowing on being on non-Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and practices is a real concern. So for example, in the 6 eco-design principles, the idea of abundant time, it's so sort of ontologically different, this conception of time. Do you worry that anybody taking it up would simplify it or change it in a way that then ends up just being a superficial grafting of the concepts? But each of you in your pieces talk about Indigenous pedagogy or thinking in those ways. So what is your thoughts on how the ideas are taken up and whether or not those can result in superficial box checking?
We do have a kind of a field experiment running in BC in the form of the First Peoples Principles of Learning, right? Which you see on posters all around the province. Most teachers have it up on the wall somewhere. And there's 7 principles. One of them is learning takes patience and time, right? That, I think, is a formulation of the abundant time principle. But how the seriousness with which teachers take that and the ways in which they let it influence and guide their pedagogy varies hugely, right? It can be absolutely taken up as a very superficial kind of, oh yeah, they're not going to get this right away, we'll have to come back to it. Maybe better than nothing, but on the other hand, a long way short of where that comes from originally, and how it is birthed out of Indigenous ways of being in the world.
Cary, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think I can maybe respond to Mark's previous point and also try to address what you're saying here concerning care and maybe bring in my colleagues too. Really nice quote from your book, your book from 2023, you both that speaks about schools how schools often, quote, institutionalize a kind of cultural stupidification that stems from our progressive estrangement with wild nature. And I think this connects to, our basic capacity to even express this care and actualize or manifest this care within these institutional constraints. And I think it's a nice way to also, talk about, Marion, what you were offering there in terms of schools and the status quo and disaster. And I think it's something sort of in the background of our conversation here too, is the extent to which schools can be re-envisioned. I mean, I think the fact is, like, they are these important sites. Like Marion's work has shown that, like, yeah, in the past, like, schools are where the community often gathers around, and they, no matter what, I've learned that from you, that they are these sites of gathering and that go beyond just learning in any limited sense or any expanded sense. And I just wanted, like, yeah, our capacities to express this care that Gillian's trying to provoke us into thinking about. Yeah, can they happen in schools? And I'm provoked by, say, Vanessa Andreotti in the beginning of, say, Hospicing Modernity, where she says, well, schools may not exist in 40 years. Like, she does this little future thought experiment, which I think is really nice, talking about sort of like the end of schools as we know them in the modern sense, or the limits of schooling. She's provoking us to think about too, as I. So I just wanted to put that out there into the field, and I'd love to hear Marion and disaster people and Thomas too, and Mark, especially Mark, respond as well. Just hear from everyone. Yeah.
Thoughts on care, and then we have a question online. So
Cool.
We keep a quick round up
I'm not sure I have a response.
on care.
Or just on anything, just do the care point I'm making in relation to schools, in relation to the just broader care.
Takes us. If
Yeah.
if I don't know, it's like you're making me the disaster person.
No, I mean, that's how I think of you. That's how I think of you. That's how I turned to you. I did this is your expertise. Yeah, this is why you're here. You're on the table.
No, it's sorry, I'm gonna believe it.
That's why you're doing your PhD, right?
Well, because Cary and I walked to the bus together, and even like we often think of disasters as like these big things, right? Like there was just this big earthquake, I think, in the Philippines, and that's often how we conceive of disasters. And I can talk about that, but even here in Metro Vancouver, so like I volunteer for emergency social services, and essentially like everybody like who responds to some sort of like apartment fire, house fire, flood, if somebody's displaced, some volunteers respond. But if there's like a large scale disruption in the city, like we gather at community centers, which are often attached to schools. I think in Grandview Woodland, like the main gathering point would be Britannia. And so I think like our article is called Illuminating Limits, because I think in our like current way, like in our current funding environment in Canada, like we don't value schooling. Like we just don't value funding it. But at the same time, we value it so much that if something goes wrong, we tell people to go to the school. So there's this irony where we both value and devalue schooling. And I think that's part of, I don't know, it's just like just the way that we kind of tell ourselves that we do care about school, But the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that when there is a large scale disaster, a couple of years ago, I went to this very beautiful like art exhibition in Taipei that was called like Education Borders, something like that. And it was essentially this nonprofit worked with 3 communities in Southeast Asia, or like in East Asia, who had been impacted by disasters, and they followed the children in these communities. There were 3 specific groups, like there were children from Nepal, there were people in Indonesia. I don't remember where the 3rd group was from, but all the children begged their parents, when are we going back to school? And so I think schools are always going to exist because they are like fundamentally important to society, and children understand learning away from them, like they crave it, like they want school, and And I don't know, to me that was just very striking, just like hearing from those kids who like they didn't have food, their homes had been destroyed, and then as soon as they had like basic shelter kind of sorted out, they were begging their parents. Like there was one image of a child, like they had their backpack hung up, and they were like, "When am I gonna get to take my backpack again?" And so I don't know. There's this disjunction. I think Cary and I were like, we don't really have answers. We're more just illuminating.
Yeah. I mentioned no answers. Yeah. No, but no, thanks, Baron. I really like the stories you bring, and I think it does connect. All these stories are really nice, and they illuminate things for us. And I think it connects too in terms of, which is very provocative in my opinion. Like knowledge is not only human, yet we're thinking about what we as humans will be doing, and also how do we gather as humans in response to wild nature, and also just grapple with that fundamental estrangement from wild nature, which is so much of Mark and Sean's work has been talking about for years.
Cristiano talked about the nature culture divide. That's one of our central problematics. The trouble is, of course, that just naming the divide that way gets you off on the wrong foot already.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's very true.
Yes. Whereas it's interesting how, if you take these indigenous ways of thinking seriously, the divide isn't built into them, as you would expect, right? It would be crazy from an indigenous point of view if we're thinking about the traditional indigenous land-based culture. You do not distinguish between nature and culture in that sharp distinction. It would be nuts to do so. So then these concepts, if you take them seriously and really try to understand where they're coming from, do help you at least a little bit get out of your typical frame of reference and simply give you a different starting point to think about pedagogical problem.
But I believe, some of this problem, is embedded in language, to start with. So I believe we all agree with what you just said, but if you go over the papers, you'll find at some points a time in which you use nature, in this divisive way, so
you cannot do it.
Yeah. It's very complicated.
Of course, we're right here.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Chris to ask a question. He's online.
Thanks. I'm already doubting what I want to say. I guess picking up, Cary, on what you were talking about with school, and Mark, what you were talking about with respect to sort of the inheritance of ontology and epistemology that modern school sort of works with, and even just the previous discussion on culture-nature divide. The pieces that sort of come to me are when I think about the school that my daughter goes to, which is like right there, and I think about how she loves school. And I think about, as a parent, how when I sent her to school, I was petrified because I didn't think she was going to get bullied. Got a pretty good school over here. We're in community. I wasn't so much worried about grades and that entire kind of legacy structure. I was really worried about, when she comes out, what will she have the ability to even think about? Like, it's not about how smart is she. It's what are the terms upon which she encounters the world? How does that get shaped? What kinds of sensibilities are going to be foreclosed upon for her as a result of going through this colonial education? And so when I think about that, I think about how inevitable this structure is at reproducing itself, the structure of education. And that if we have any hope for the kinds of aspirations that I'm hearing here, I honestly think it takes a real deep commitment to thinking in different terms, in different language. I don't think we want schools to be around anymore, because I think schools were a tool of genocide. I think what my kid wants is her friends. What my kid wants is challenges. What my kid wants is to be ignited and to be curious, and she wants to encounter the world. And yes, that's happening in this place that we call school. But when we call it school, when we have these sort of top-line curriculums that potentially graft on indigenous ways of understanding into this framework, I think that structure inevitably does what it was always meant to do. Dwayne Donald called the severing of relationships. He's got a really great article on forts, and sort of using the school or a fort analogy for school, and the walling off of relationality. So I guess this is a long comment, but then the point, I think, like in this discussion, what if it's actually about really cultivating a discomfort, an ongoing discomfort? And the thing that Dwayne Donald talks about is the ethical relationality and the sort of accountability, the responsibility. Like, is it something about cultivating, like we were talking about care? What if what's behind the care is actually that sense of accountability and personal responsibility for what goes on, whether it's in the moment as a teacher, whether it's thinking, as a curriculum theorist or whatever it is, there are real elements of action in the world that require each of us to do different things. And, yes, we can publish literature about that, but then also we have to encounter that moment with the same kind of commitment and responsibility that we're writing about. So I guess, as Mark and Cary know, I'm rambling, and I tend to ramble. So maybe I'll just stop taking up space, but hopefully there was something in there that was worth listening to.
Very interesting. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you sharing that. If anyone would like to comment, or I can go to a second question online.
Yeah, anyone want yeah. Thomas, I'll drop from you later. Yeah, I want you to get in there. Yeah, what is that question? Maybe we can hold these together. Yeah, I don't know.
Just briefly about school. The etymology of school, the origins of the word from Greek, schola, is something like free time, leisure. Right? So all we have to do is recover the origins of school.
Only that. I mean, like suspension from the obligations of everyday life.
Possibly,
It's not necessarily free time. It's just time free from.
Yes.
But it's
unscheduled time. I think maybe might be the.
I mean, I love what Marian's saying. Issues about this. So we think of it kind of as, like you were just about to say, time free from the demands of productivity. So I do think that's what we do anytime we enact school. Well, you're not with your loved ones, you're not with your family, you're not with each other, and you may know each other, but you probably don't know each other that well. Right. And we're all gathering here and creating a kind of space-time matter arrangement together. And it's really, it's a kind of time, but we are gathering and studying together, suspended from these strong demands that we might have on us from either the polis or from our, the oikos from home, right. Either one. That's why I look at it in terms of those sort of Greek domains of political and social organization. It's a kind of time that is actually really, really essential. Essential in order to even give shape to oneself. You know what I mean? We all have PhDs. I mean, Mary's getting a PhD. Thomas doesn't have a PhD, right? Yeah, it's like a lot of time that we've committed to give shape to something, and it's a great gift too. It's a great gift, and we've decided in the 19th century that we will have compulsory schooling paid for by taxation in order to actually offer this gift to a greater number of people than it was previously offered to. And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that what happens in schools is educational. What happens in schools means it is good, normatively good. Yeah, but please, yeah.
How do you respond to what Cary's saying?
Well, I agree with Cary. The reason I reacted to your definition is, well, Chris, like I sensed a bit of all right, I don't want to say like anti-intellectualism, but I feel like a lot of the time in these academic circles, there's this idea that that writing papers is like not good enough, and it's kind of like we use this complex language, like intellectual language, and academia and the ivory tower is a problem. But I think it's a gift, and I think it's something to be nurtured, and I think it's really beautiful to be able to labor on something without worrying about like, well, what is going to be the worst? Like I have a lot of interests that are not necessarily of value. What you, we're like even talking about the value of like what we're doing is taking us back to this like capitalist way of thinking about knowledge. And the thing is like there's like we don't know what we don't know. And I think what I like about like scholarly inquiry is the ability to just be able to suspend and and uh and labor on something that I'm interested in without having to justify it to anyone. I think because it is a gift and it is a privilege, and for me that it was a hard-earned privilege, I really want to enjoy it while I can. And I also want the students and like the students that like I'm in cohort with, as you know, like in my courses, as well as the students that I'm beginning to teach, like I want them to feel that similar excitement, right? And I do sense that there's a lack of excitement around academia, especially because of, you know, macroeconomic factors. But at the end of the day, like it is a very exciting thing to be, and you really see it yeah, like in times of crisis, you know, and a lot of children do like to learn, and I'm sure you see it in your own child as well. And I think it doesn't have to be perfect, like Carrie's saying, right? Like just the fact that it exists can be good enough. I don't know.
What I heard Chris saying is, I don't know, Chris, but you'd love it if your child was curiously engaged at all times and left school with a sense of the greater human and more than human kinship. But the challenge is that that's not necessarily what's going to happen. I heard an assumption that they might come out a little bit jaded. They might come out a little bit more self-centered if they're in a public school, perhaps.
More actually, almost the opposite. I would say like my kid is developing that, but I don't know that it's school that's doing it for her. I think school claims certain kinds of benefits that maybe it's overclaiming. And and yes, it's more like there's a deeper structure of what it is to learn, what it is to know. Like you were saying, I don't think I'm anti-intellectual so much as saying that there's an existing gap in much of what we call scholarship. And the gap isn't to say that scholarship is bad, but it's about something like a heartful responsibility for what it's doing in the world. The work that we're doing with language and the subtlety of language is deeply important. It's materially important. It shapes things. But I think there is sort of a need for a much more shared understanding, a shared shape of what that responsibility is too. This is where we come to the more than human world. I think the biggest kind of illusion of responsibility is ecological responsibility. We've sort of stopped seeing ourselves as being of nature. And so, you know, so it's more just to say like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I take away from Chris's comment too, is I like the question you put, what are, when she comes out of this, and I mean, I know Chris is so deeply intellectual, I could never imagine anyone less intellectual. Terms for which she can even think when she comes out of this as being the important thing that you offered. And it's like, yeah, she may, and I appreciate what Marion is saying too, like it is a great, and that's what is my point as well, is that this study is this great gift, and this time is a gift, abundant time. Oh, sorry, I'll shut up. But yeah, will you even care about anything? Heartful sensibility. I like that.
So I'd like us to get to a few more questions. I hope you feel like we've talked about yours a little bit. Great, Chris. So Jeffrey Woolard has asked, does anyone have thoughts on spirituality, prayer, religion in Canadian university setting? I think of tensions between secularism and religious traditions and practice being unwelcome in pedagogy or being estranged from dialogue with scholarship. Has there been a too rigid distinction between the secular and the sacred? Thoughts?
Like a lot.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Jeffrey, would you like to speak to it? I realize now you said you would say it. So Jeffrey, do you want an additional discussion?
The only thing I'd add was that I'm at UBC, and the Department of Statistics organized a talk by this Indigenous scholar from Montana. Like he grew up in Montana, but he's faculty at UBC, and he's in kind of soil science. and was working with his home community, and he said I really viscerally feel that the talk he gave was like indigenous approaches to data or something. So it's kind of like really low level and then some kind of high level worldview perspective on these kind of monads of statistics, models, data. And he said, I really feel like so much of my kind of tribal way of being is unwelcome at this university. It's literally pushed out to the peripheries where there's kind of traditional confessional religions that have their colleges at the border of UBC. And he's like, I don't know any place where this really belongs, this type of dialogue, maybe at this sort of one-off talk with 15 people that happens once a term, but it's not really the incentive structure. It doesn't really count for much on his CV. And I've been thinking about that in the context of the laws coming, kind of being debated and rolled out in Quebec, and some ongoing work I'm doing on developing the first year AI course and incorporating indigenous ways of knowing. Yeah, so I'd like to know people's thoughts about that.
Thank you. Great question. Did you want to elaborate on your answer, Mark?
The third of the principles that Sean and I wrote about in the paper was sacred respect, which was simply an attempt, a rough and imperfect translation of a Luciano concept, Aesop. And obviously, I can't tell you exactly what that is, except that Richard Atlier suggested sacred respect as one way of translating that into English. But as I pondered it, and it was the hardest of these concepts that we were writing about to grapple with, it is basically about the way that things in the world call us to a particular ethical relationship to them. And the best way to express that dimension of ethical relationship in English is to speak of the sacred. And that does overlap or coincide with the earlier work that Sean did that Cary alluded to when we wrote a book. And Louise in particular. So those 6 prompts, design prompts that Louise was talking about and trying out in her class, abundant time and mystery and knowability and so on, came out of an attempt to think through or feel our way. And I should say this wasn't just Sean and myself. This was a team. We had 4 RAs working with us on this project as well. So it was really the 6 of us in conversation. Feel our way into the kinds of principles that might underlie sustainable education for sustainability might look like. And sacredness fell out of that. The sacred, the wild, and the just fell out of that as 3 major kind of axes that intersect with these 6 design prompts. So thinking of the sacred, the wild, and the just as kind of a confluence, three, you might say 3 ways of looking at the same thing, which is the way that the world is this unfathomably complex, self-renewing, and fluid beingness, let's say. Those concepts in English give us different windows on how we might relate that, I guess. And sacredness is one of those 3.
Jen, I think that Louise has her hand up. Louise.
Oh, yeah.
Please, Louise.
Okay, thank you. First, I just kind of want to ask, because I cannot make out who is in the room other than who's introduced themselves. Is that Charles? Charles. Charles was also on my thesis committee, and he would have a lot to say on this concept of the sacred and education. And I think, well, overall, this is discussed really well in the Canadian Education Network on Contemplative Education. I mean, there's a whole body of people talking about this, but in terms of our particular specific topic today of education for the Metacrisis, I think that spirituality in the classroom is essential. And there is an enormous amount of tension involved in trying to bring anything spiritual into a modern classroom. I think that I do it, but I do it very tentatively, and I'm very careful not to step on toes. But I think that it's absolutely critical that the students engage in some contemplative practice in order to make the space in their minds and in their hearts to connect with more than human beings in the natural world, and also to accept each other in the room on different terms than they would otherwise. A non-judgmental, non-evaluative understanding of each other. So I do guided meditations under the guise of like what's commonly known as, mindfulness, which sort of approaches neutrality, but in my mind, it's absolutely not neutral. And that these practices are essential in the classroom. And also, to Mark's point, some of these principles that he and Sean put together are really, really critical for expanding the possibility for understanding.
Thank you so much, Louise. Charles.
To get started on.
Charles, maybe you should say something.
You're here.
Yeah, you have Charles is somebody who's
You are one.
spent a long time thinking about the religion. Oh, I broke it. Religion. No, I didn't. Okay.
Okay. I'll just briefly say, touching on what you said, Mark, and I was really touched by that because we have a whole master's program on contemplative inquiry, and it's a 2-year program. It's fabulous. The students love it. It's been enormously popular. And when I was teaching the final course last summer, which is the comprehensive exam and the directed readings, the 904 course, we had a whole unit on the sacred. The students loved it. Now, these are students coming from all kinds of backgrounds, secular, religious, you name it. But without exception, they were hungering for this. And we find this almost universally, undergrad students, graduate students. There's often this tension, secular and religious. And we go there, we go right into that. And often spirituality and religion get conflated, which I think is really unfortunate. And when we have these conversations, it brings the temperature down. People are no longer, if they're secularly oriented, so to speak, they're no longer so concerned or upset about religion and so on. And when we explore the idea that spirituality, just like the somatic dimension of our lives, the aesthetic dimension of our lives, the intellectual dimension of our lives, is just part of who we are. If you want to use the word existential, I often call it spiritual existential. These are the issues around who we are. What is our purpose and meaning in life? Where do we find joy and connection to something larger than ourselves? So again, universally, and contemplative approaches are the approaches that allow us to explore all these by helping us rest and still our consciousness. And that's where all this comes and is illumined, if you will. So we have a great time exploring all this. And again, universally, students love it. Referring to Quebec, I find it so interesting because Charles Taylor, of course, is from Quebec. And he's done so much work around multiculturalism and bilingualism in Quebec. And of course, his work is, one of his latest books was Secular Age, where he's exploring all of these issues and how religion and spirituality has played a huge part in Western culture. It goes right back to his book, Sources of the Self. And his latest book is just one I adore and love. It's called Cosmic Connections. And he's exploring the work of all the romantics and the themes that the romantics had with their work. It's fabulous work. And again, so bottom line, students just drink it all in. They've been hungering for this stuff.
If you want to respond, Cary, and then I want to invite anyone online to ask another question, and then there might be one that would like to be tied up, given that we have 10 minutes left.
Sure, I'll be quick with this. Okay, thank you. I just want to I just want to maybe try to bring, thank you, Charles, and just try to make a few connections to both what was said around indigenous knowledge practices, and maybe try to bring in our Thomas here into the conversation a little bit, because I think one thing we look at in our article is how the work of imagining post-growth futures, often kind of like your idea of ancient futures, it involved looking at things that might have happened in the past, and we often try to think about we can think about indigenous spiritual traditions, or just maybe spiritual practices writ large as sometimes, in my opinion, realities of everyday life. But I think one thing we try to focus on is two things: the potlatch as a giving ceremony, as well as the Mesopotamian sacred jubilee, which is a form of debt forgiveness practice. Ancient debt forgiveness practice by other cultures too. And I just wanted to bring in maybe Thomas here, just because I think it's a nice brings in a few of these threads in terms of like the work being spiritual, taking heartful sensibility. It involves these practices of giving and receiving and giving things away, and the practicalities of how we organize, maybe even economically. And I do think that, like, I would like to find a way of thinking about this, the sacred as not devoid from these practicalities of everyday life. That we have to, organize around resources and land, and give gifts to each other, and receive things from each other, and be in giving relationships. So yeah, maybe Thomas, can you offer anything?
I'm not sure I've necessarily thought of the redistribution of practices of like ancient Mesopotamia as this. We had thought of it as a practice for stabilizing the social order, because what emerged from what I've learned in ancient Mesopotamia was that because there was agriculture started taking off, and particularly agriculture around storable resources, power started to accumulate, and people could store energy, food energy, and support life for long periods of time, and also prevent that energy from going out into whoever's hand, so it could be controlled. And it posed a problem. What tended to occur was early agricultural workers would be guaranteed access to land, and in return, they would guarantee some of their labor to some sort of nation building project, some sort of corvée labor where they would help build some monuments, and they would also offer up some of the food stores that they produced. And in return, the state would provide all kinds of, you might call it services, like forwards and ale and grain and things to get them through the harder times of the season. And but what tended to occur with that surplus storage was practices of accounting and debt and charging interest. And I think that they learned this the hard way, but charging interest created problems where people that couldn't pay the debts back fall into debt bondage to not necessarily the state, but to private actors. And over the years, because of crop failures and other things like this that were beyond the control of individuals, people would fall into debt bondage. And it became imperative for the state to forgive debts and redistribute land so that the state could continue this arrangement with labor producing resources with agricultural producers. And so there was a tension between the private powerful elites and the state and the workers, the agriculturalists, which was the large majority of the population. And the Jubilee practice emerged out of the tension there, stabilizing social relations. So
And it's fascinating how much of our Abrahamic religions and the Bible, for instance, focuses on these debt jubilees and these practices of interest and connecting them specifically to spirituality, right? Yeah. So I just think that was a lovely review, Thomas. I could not have done better. But I do think these practices of forgiving debt, of giving things away, like the potlatch ceremony, so central to the Pacific Northwest, have necessary spiritual dimensions and components. And Thomas described the structural economic things very succinctly and well. But regardless, they necessitate, you might say, a sensibility that you might call spiritual. So I just want to make that point.
I appreciate that. And I want to go to a question that Cristiano asked when I asked for questions ahead of time. And I think it'd be a nice way to hear from all of our authors before we close. And that goes back to this question of academia being part of the problem, or maybe it's not a problem, it's a solution. I'd like to know your preferred move of refusal, resistance, rethinking, or reorienting practice. What's your preferred one? Does that make sense? Because if we ask the question, let's put it on yourself for a second. What is your own preferred means of rethinking, reorienting, refusing, resisting? You want to start?
I came up with something. Actually, I just wanted to start by acknowledging that actually, by living capitalist societies, we live in contradiction all the time. And so at the same time that I'm talking about, the conditions in which global South countries and the populations they live in, I moved to Canada, and enjoying a different lifestyle because of that. So this is a huge contradiction, but I think that, by acknowledging this contradiction, we also acknowledge that everything that we try to do, is also kind of driven by a certain intention. And so I believe that we have to identify those intentions that we have, and this kind of helps us to sort out the kind of projects that we get involved in, that we will prioritize, the no's and the yeses that we will say, for which kind of projects, and so because our time is limited, our resources are more and more limited, and we live in this precarious world, and we have to offer whatever we have that's really, we think that's valuable, that others can really learn from our experience, learn together by talking about some of those points. So I would say that for myself, trying to identify this intention behind, each of the projects, help me with choosing, what I'm going to do, what I'm going to try, because, also moving to this land, entails a lot of learning, of new perspectives. I knew a lot about indigenous perspectives in Brazil, but now, I live in a different land that relates differently, and so it takes a lot of time to learn all that, but I understand I'm trying my best and, to do that. So yeah, basically that, and I think that speaks to lots of things, like the question of schools, we have to identify, and in Latin American decolonial theory, we talk a lot about, the cracks in which we can, kind of act in and do things differently, even if the systems in which we work it, and they are rotten, or maybe they suffer from bigger problems that we cannot address with the daily practices. We have to try our best and try to identify those cracks in the system, I would say.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from everybody. Yeah. Louise as well. I don't know if you wanted to go next, or did you want to go next, Louise?
If I had to pinpoint just one practice that I do to shift education, it would be a pedagogical practice. It would be the practice of offering guided meditation in class time at the beginning of class, and asking all the students to participate for between 5 and 7 minutes. So that's just my one discrete preferred pedagogical practice.
Cool. Thank you so much, Louise. Thomas, Marion? Carrie?
You guys go first, please.
My thought is that kind of similar to, I guess, Cary and I were talking about this earlier, William Penner's idea that education seems to follow the status quo, the larger systemic trajectory, and William Rees's point that it seems to be at like higher institutions, like not necessarily primary and post-secondary, but definitely secondary, but post-secondary education, setting people up to have expectations about having higher incomes and producing individuals that are basically elites and consuming the most generally. So I always, the way that I think, while I agree that focusing on what's going on in classrooms and helping students grapple with their immediate lives and the wider environment that they're dealing with, there is also an issue, a systemic issue that is driving behavior. And somehow we've got to navigate these two very, very difficult to reconcile.
Thank you for that. Marion?
I don't know. I feel like we just have to accept the world as it is, and this might be a bit corny, but the Serenity Prayer is very helpful.
Acceptance is very difficult. That's a whole other conversation.
But I just don't think it's inherent to capitalism. Like, I feel like a lot of the stuff that we talk about, it's like the world is never under control, never has been, never will be. It's ongoing, it's always changing. You're born into systems that change as we learn them, right? Like as we are children.
Yeah.
As we become adults, as we like react against them, as we like enable them without even realizing it. I don't know, so I feel like I just have to accept that.
So it's like, I think that's important. That's like humility in the face. And that is a massive like lesson in life, spiritual lesson, I think, right? And I take that away from your working disaster. Yeah, no, thanks, Thomas and Marion and Cristiano. And yeah, great question. I just kind of tend to think about it in terms of like small. Out of it can never be totally, it's an excess that can never be totally contained. So if I choose, for one thing I do is, don't use social media. Well, it might have some random ripple effects on people around me. I also have never driven a car. Well, that's not going to change the world, but it may have some random ripple effects on how I live my life and how people in relation to me live my life. And it's just these small acts that I think are of massive significance. And if we can just focus on everyday acts like that and just bring intention to them, and I think serenity and humility in the face of what we can't do, I think is part of that. Then yeah, that's what I would like my pedagogy to illuminate.
Nice. I'm choosing to be hopeful.
Yeah, that's what you brought to the table.
I'm working it hard.
Be contrary. I was thinking that for me, one of the key pedagogical practices is a kind of decentering. So to be alert to what kinds of knowledge are being privileged in any particular context and look for ways to disrupt that privileging. So if we're talking about, English language academic text, let's bring in texts that are not written in English, at least originally, texts that are not academic, but perhaps poetic or disruptive in other ways, texts that are indigenous. If we find that all our doing and thinking is human-centered, then let's go outside and spend some time in the woods, on the land, attuning ourselves to a different way of being and a different way of knowing. And maybe just in that vein, perhaps I could just share a quote from our paper from Richard Atleo. This is from his book Principles of Sewell, where he's thinking about the ecological crisis, and he writes, "The process towards the possibility of sustainable living for all life forms is necessarily developmental, which naturally requires the application of the characteristics that define a healthy person: strong, visionary, caring, loving, cooperative, creative, insightful, discerning, empathetic, faithful, hopeful, and enduring."
Beautiful. Nice way to end. I want to thank all of the authors for coming today. More so, I appreciate you for doing this work and doing the hard thinking that's part of it, and enjoying the practice of having the space and the time to do the hard thinking.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thanks to all those who joined online, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure you could reach out to any of the authors at any time if you had further questions. So I hope you come to the next DARE session and have a beautiful day.
Thanks, Gillian, for hosting us.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you, Gillian. Thanks, Chris, Jeff.